White Death, Simo Häyhä, was born on December 17, 1905, in the small town of Rautjärvi, Finland, near the Russian border. His colleagues described him as a friendly, polite, and introverted man who did not like to socialize and worked only as a farm laborer. Rautjärvi is surrounded by the harsh Finnish wilderness, so although Simo grew up in a quiet area far from city life, his own life was far from easy. A harsh and unforgiving winter forced the people of southeastern Finland to come to terms with the wild nature around them. Initially, Simo excelled as a naturally talented hunter, spending much of his youth outside in the woods, shooting small game with an old double-barreled rifle. At the age of 20, he served in the military and was promoted to corporal. He entered several skiing and shooting competitions. He was a true biathlete and became very famous for his rifle skills. Like most Finnish men, he joined the national militia after his military service. This was the suojeluskunta, a service for young men since Finland's declaration of independence in 1917 and the Civil War the following year. The service trained people like Häyhä to be prepared for when Finland needed them most. The moment came on November 30th, 1939, when the Soviet Union declared war on Finland. People like Simo Häyhä, who had a modest upbringing, cared little about world politics or the ambitions of dictators like Joseph Stalin. But like most Finns, he was fiercely independent and valued his and his country's freedom above all else. These freedoms would be lost if the Finnish people did not defend them, no matter how great the enemy. So when the call to arms came, Häyhä, like most of his compatriots, answered. He joined the 13th Infantry Regiment in the Kola area, north of Lake Ladoga. The Soviet 9th and 14th Armies aimed for a quick breakthrough across the Kolanjoki River, but they were completely unprepared to fight in the area. Densely forested and difficult at the best of times, the Soviets were now trying to advance during one of the worst winters in modern history, with 2 meters of snow and temperatures dropping to -30 degrees. Häyhä was given a Finnish Mosin Nagant M2830, which had been in production since 1928. Slightly shorter and heavier than the Russian-made rifle, but with the reliability and accuracy typical of the Mosin Nagant, the M28 was an excellent sniper rifle. Nicknamed Pistikorva, meaning pointed ear, because of the large ears on the front sight, this rifle would perform well in the hands of an experienced marksman like Simo Häyhä. The Finns could not hope to win against the might of the Soviet army in direct combat. The Soviets had more tanks, men, and artillery. In contrast, the Finnish art of war relied heavily on hit-and-run tactics, with men on skis who knew the terrain to outflank, infiltrate, and ambush the lumbering Soviet invaders, many of whom didn't have skis or didn't know how to ski, thereby hindering their mobility. While the Finns were naturally accustomed to winter conditions, the Soviet troops were anything but. Many came from the Leningrad military district and were not even equipped for a long, drawn-out conflict. Winters in Finland are harsh and unforgiving, and even when the sun comes out during the short days, it is still very cold. Häyhä wore a thick, heavy snowsuit, insulating himself as much as possible from the snow and cold wind, and he wore fur gloves and a sniper's mask. The white color of his outfit blended perfectly with the winter environment and snow-covered forests of Kola. He preferred to work alone, being accustomed to scouting dense forests by himself and relying on his instincts. Patience was essential, just as important as leaving as few traces as possible. A hunter must be cunning and careful in his actions. Carrying only a day's supply of food and about 50 or 60 rounds of ammunition, Häyhä relied on his knowledge of the wilderness to find a good place to build a sniper's nest. Once he found his position, he would build a small snow fort around his position to blend in with the surroundings. He rested his rifle on a mound of snow, which stabilized his aim and prevented the snow from being thrown upwards by the recoil. Then, he waited for the enemy to march into his field of fire. When Soviet soldiers, struggling and freezing in the snow, crossed his path, Häyhä would put a handful of snow in his mouth to hide his breath. Then he pulled the trigger. It is said that during his army training, he was able to hit targets at a distance of 150 meters, up to 16 times a minute. Now, the route was littered with dead Soviet soldiers, prey to hidden snipers, with no idea what had befallen them. Soviet positions were soon found devoid of living men. but littered with corpses frozen in their final movements before being shot. Sometimes they were found still standing. In sub-zero temperatures, even minor injuries were often fatal, as a weakened body struggled to survive the harsh conditions. Perfect shot. Häyhä was not believed to have missed his targets often. During his short time on the front lines, the number of casualties he caused reached unprecedented levels. Hundreds of Soviets died from his gunfire, so much so that his superiors didn't believe the stories at first. According to records, just before Christmas, he killed 25 soldiers in one day. While many Finnish and Soviet snipers used modern rifles equipped with telescopic lenses, Häyhä relied on traditional iron sights. Not only did he feel this gave him a better view of his target, but more importantly, it allowed him to keep his head lower and reduce his profile, making him harder to spot. Telescopic lenses could reflect light and reveal a sniper's position, as happened to many Soviet snipers sent to fight him, only to meet their end at the hands of his outdated rifle. However, Häyhä was also trained with a Suomi 9mm submachine gun, and depending on the battle, he also carried hand grenades and the traditional Puukko army knife as a last resort. As a sniper often operating alone behind enemy lines, Häyhä had to be cautious and sometimes passed up obvious targets to avoid compromising his position. The Soviets began increasing their counter-sniping activities, especially after Häyhä's rising kill count made him infamous. If they suspected his location, they would order artillery strikes in the general area to try and neutralize him. There is even a story of a Soviet commander requesting a famous Soviet sniper to eliminate Häyhä. After killing several Finnish soldiers and officers, the sniper waited for Häyhä to react and reveal himself. He waited, and when the sun set, he decided to pause and get up. That's when Häyhä shot him in the head. Another story tells of Soviet soldiers carrying large iron shields into the field for protection against snipers. Finnish snipers like Häyhä were so accurate that they simply shot them in the kneecap. As these stories spread, Häyhä became legendary in the eyes of both his friends and enemies. Finnish propaganda painted him as a symbol of Finland's small but defiant resistance, while Soviet propaganda called him Balaya Smrt, the White Death. The legend of the White Death spoke of a ghost-like figure who was everywhere and nowhere, tirelessly creeping through the forest. This figure terrified Soviet soldiers and boosted the morale of the Finnish troops. On February 17, 1940, 80 days after the invasion, Simo Häyhä was officially declared a hero of Finland by the Finnish government. With hundreds of kills to his name, he was awarded the Kola Cross and was promoted, receiving a specially made Sako M2830 rifle as a gift. But despite the legend, Simo Häyhä was neither invincible nor a ghost. He was human, just like any other Finn defending his homeland. In early March 1940, as winter settled in, it became clear that although Finland had shocked the world by holding back the mighty Red Army, they could not hold out forever. The Soviets were learning. They gathered more weapons, more competent leaders, and better tactics. As winter ended, so did the Finns' advantage with the weather. No matter how bravely they resisted, the sheer number of Soviet troops would eventually overwhelm them. On March 6th, Häyhä was caught in the middle of a new Soviet attack on Kola. Fighting alongside regular troops, he killed at least a dozen men that day. An exploding bullet hit his jaw and ripped open his lower face. Saved by his comrades, he was dragged out of the fighting and taken to the hospital. He spent several days in a coma, and when he awoke on March 13th, peace had been signed. The war was over for him and his country. For an area of some 25,000 square miles, the Soviets had paid a heavy price. Most estimates of the Soviet death toll were around 130,000, though the actual number may have been as high as 250,000. Finland had defeated the David and Goliath of the Soviet Union on a scale never before imagined, and Finland's independence was saved. What happened to Simo? Simo Häyhä had to live with the scars on his face for the rest of his life, but he made a full recovery. However, he could not return to his home, which was now across the Soviet border, so he found a new home and lived a long, peaceful life until his death in 2002. In later interviews, Häyhä repeatedly emphasized that while serving in the Winter War, he was simply doing what he was told. But he was the best at it. In less than 100 days, his official kill count was 505, making him the most successful sniper in history. That was just the official number. Unofficially, the total was even higher. Of course, these numbers will always be debated. Such is the nature of war. But the legend of the White Death lives on today, not only in Finland. When asked what made him such a great marksman, Häyhä simply answered, practice. Thank you for watching, and help the channel grow by liking, commenting, and subscribing.